All right, folks, welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We've got a short final segment because we talked so much in the first two segments. So I'm going to do a quick preview of next week's episode before we jump back into our Q&A. We're keeping it super casual this week. Next week, things are going to get a little more professional because Beth is going to be talking about preparing for an undergrad degree in business and how to develop leadership in your extracurricular profile. So not so casual. We'll also talk a little bit about starting the activity list for the Common App. And Shannon is going to be back next week because she is on the show every week for a legislative update. And she alluded to some changes to the need-based formula in an earlier question in the last segment. So Shannon, you'll be back to talk all about that stuff.
And I will be all business next week.
All business. That's right. No fun whatsoever.
No fun at all.
Okay.
Getting it out of my system now, Ian.
That's right. Well, let's have some fun with this. Next question. This comes from Jean. It looks like kind of a serious question. So we will take this seriously. What kind of financial aid can my child get based on the fact that I'm a single parent? Great question.
Yeah. And there is no, sort of special pot of money for single parents or their children. I will say that you will naturally qualify potentially for more financial aid based on the fact that you will be applying for aid at most colleges with one income instead of two incomes. If it was a two-parent family, they'd be looking at, double the income. Right. In some cases, whereas applying as a single parent, a one-parent household will only be showing one parent's income. You will naturally qualify for more financial aid, unless of course that one income is very high. Right. One income could be higher than two incomes from somebody else, but you're naturally, Jean, going to qualify likely for more financial aid because you're only looking at one income. And that is that most schools, I will say the exception is colleges that use the CSS profile. Most colleges that require the profile form, in addition to the FAFSA, there are about 200 of them. They tend to be private schools, selective schools. Those colleges typically do ask for non-custodial parent information as well. So if there is a non-custodial parent in the picture, there's only one parent in your household, but if there is another parent out there in the picture that could potentially contribute to the student's college education, profile schools want to know about it and know the financial information of that household, and they will look at both households. That is profile schools. Only colleges that just use the FAFSA just look at the custodial household, so they would just be looking at the one parent's income. If that parent were to marry or remarry, the step parent's information is also looked at.
Gotcha.
So I guess that's one piece of advice, Jean, while your children are applying for financial aid going to college. As a single parent, probably want to stay single in most cases.
Wow.
I know.
Relationship advice here.
I don't tend to give love advice here on Getting In, a College Coach Conversation, but I'll just say that was something that I see, and it wasn't an uncommon occurrence where when I worked in a financial aid office, a student would come in with a great financial aid package, qualified for tons of need-based aid, and then their custodial parent remarried. And it was, double the household income. And all of a sudden, for the next academic year, they lost a whole lot of financial aid eligibility. So
wow,
that's a bit of a Debbie Downer, sort of un-Cupid-like relationship advice here when it comes to financial
follow the
aid.
heart or follow the head. I don't know. That's
I know it's tough. But nothing special in terms of your process. It's applying for financial aid as anyone else would, but at most schools, it's just the one income instead of two.
Great. Cool.
Okay.
You got another one for me?
I do, Ian. The next question for you is from John.
Okay,
and he says, in a recent podcast on early decision deferrals, you referenced Northwestern as a highly selective school from which a deferred applicant should probably not even try for a more competitive school. So I think he's referring to, if you got deferred during the early decision process from Northwestern and thinking about your options, in regular decision, you might want to go less selective, not more selective. Right. I think that's the advice he was referring to. Now, your advice may maybe sound for a typical year. Still, this year is unusual for two reasons. First, colleges must account for gap students from last year's admitted class. Second, since testing is optional this year, highly selective colleges received more early decision applicants, possibly overwhelming the admissions staff ability to make quick ED decisions. If my son is deferred from Northwestern, perhaps this decision was simply random noise and a poor signal of his strength as a candidate given this year's unique circumstances. So this is John's proposition.
And I'm glad I'm getting this question because I said this about Northwestern. This was something
you did. Oh, good.
Yeah, this wasn't Beth and it wasn't Sally. It was me, and I'm getting called out.
You on it, Ian. And yeah, so what can defend your position?
I will defend my position. No, I think the first thing I want to start with is this last question or the last bit of the question where John says, perhaps this was random noise and a poor signal of his strength as a candidate given this year's unique circumstances. I would say that when a decision comes back from a Northwestern, a similarly competitive school, or a more competitive school, a decision to deny is not an indication of a student's strength as a candidate, period. There is just so much strength in the applicant pool that there are students who are being denied or turned away or deferred who are excellent students. And that's really important to keep in mind. So it's not a commentary on the student, it's more a commentary on the different levers that are at work in this process. We talked with the last admission-based question about the sense of uncertainty out there, and John is really getting to this. I don't see any indication that the gap year students from last year are affecting the way that colleges are changing their enrollment numbers for this coming year. Most schools are saying we're going to have a larger freshman class, but we are not anticipating any effect on our incoming student population for the fall of 2021. And that's something that I think we've heard again and again. We very rarely have heard any indication from schools that they are admitting fewer students because of those gap years that students took during the pandemic. So I think that that's really important to push out, at least as far as information is showing us. Generally, what I'm speaking to when I talk about Northwestern, and we should take a step back and say, when you get a deferred decision from a school, your app list really probably shouldn't change at all. Your app list is something that you develop before you start to hear back from schools, and it should be balanced. It should have a strategic approach to it, and it should include colleges you're interested in. And what I think is the hardest thing for students and families to do is after they get that first piece of information from one school, an N of one, not to question how they went through that process of choosing that list. Right? Getting a defer from Northwestern could mean something about your strength as a candidate, but more likely it just means that Northwestern didn't have room for you in that particular class. And the rest of your list, if it was balanced before, is still balanced now. I think
that's a big if.
That's a big if. It needs to be balanced, right? Yeah. But I think the idea that you can say, all right, I didn't get into Northwestern, it's really selective. So I'm now going to look at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford. I don't think that that's a good idea. And I think that this comes from my experience and is admittedly a smaller lens to look at. But there are very, very rare cases where students that are getting into a school that is more selective than a Northwestern, which is already in the top 25 in terms of selectivity, would not also get into a school that is as selective as Northwestern. And that just has to do with the caliber of students that are admitted among those top schools. In this year, testing is not a part of that conversation for a lot of students, which is fine. But I think that there's a perception around the most selective institutions that numbers really drive the process, when numbers are more of a seat at the table, and the locus of the decision happens around extracurricular involvement and essays and letters of rec, which if you saw the letters of rec that came through some of those schools, you would see just how sterling those candidates are. They are really, really remarkable in lots of different circumstances. So in general, there are exceptions to every rule. I have had students that were denied from Vanderbilt, but got into Stanford. But by and large, it would tend to be the case that if you get deferred from a Northwestern, you're not going to go and apply to a more selective institution in the regular round and find success. But John, if that does happen for your son, please write us in. I would be happy to be proven wrong in this case, and we will celebrate your son's success on a future episode of Getting In. But thank you very much for the question. Shannon, I'm getting pinged that we have like 30 seconds left and they're just going to cut the mic. They're going to bang the gong. We're out of here. But I want to thank you for
enough of our fun for
That's
today,
enough.
Ian. They're done with us.
It just flies by. I got to do more of this Q&A stuff. I love it. Thank you for coming. I know you're going to be on the show again next week.
Yes.
Bring that talent, bring that fame. We'd love to have you on the show.
Thank you. I will see you all next week.
That will be great. And everyone, we hope we see you next week. It'll be another great show. Until then, enjoy spring break whenever it occurs, and we will look forward to seeing you again on an episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. Take care.